I think it's not just that the glass is half empty, but I think it's been smashed into a billion pieces and we're all bleeding off the shards. I think journalism is a really bad way.
It's summer. It's one of those times, if you're lucky enough to get away, you sit on a deck chair and you think, what is the meaning of life? Where am I going? Why do I do this? So we thought, because we often get questions on the Today podcast about journalism, we should talk about the future of it, what it is, what it means, where it's going.
We could just talk about the past as well. I mean, I'm quite nostalgic for the past, even though I wasn't there for some of it. We should start off by
Well, that's true of all of us.
That's true of all of us. We should start by saying what journalism is. Have you worked it out, Nick? You've only done it for about, 40 odd years?
Yeah. Where do you start? I mean, one answer to what journalism is finding things out that other people don't want you to find out, holding the powerful to account. But that's a bit of it.
So, informing people about what's going on, applying scrutiny to power, and maybe enlightening a culture in the broadest sense. And do you know what we need? We need some fellow podcasters to make sense of this. And I can think of two very good ones. They've got a podcast from Radio 4, BBC Sounds. It's called When It Hits the Fan. And they know a lot about their respective worlds. They know more about their respective worlds than you and I do.
So instead of me saying that you're talking rubbish and you telling me that I'm talking rubbish, they can both tell us that we're both talking rubbish.
Just give us a chance. Yeah.
There's one of them. We'll introduce him later. Look, that's the main thing journalism is about, speaking out of turn. This is a podcast about the future of journalism. I think it's fair to say you're going to encounter a diversity, a plurality of views. Shall we do it?
Let's do it.
Journalists have lost their role as gatekeepers. They've lost their monopoly on public information. And although it's fashionable to say, as I hope you're about to go on to do so we can have a nice Barney, that we should see the glass as half full, I think it's not just that the glass is half empty, but I think it's been smashed into a billion pieces and we're all bleeding off the shards. I think journalism is a really bad way. I think that social media has done terrible damage to news. I think trust in news has collapsed. I think there is very limited evidence that young people will pay subscriptions for the news. I think the algorithms of social media favour noise over news, and I think that they spread lies. And if you look at what's actually happening in terms of local news, in terms of regional news, I think that it's harder to make a living as a reporter than it's ever been. And yet at the same time, we need journalism more than ever. Now, if that doesn't fill you with pessimism, if that doesn't get you switching off to other podcasts, what will?
I can barely talk, I'm so upset. I've heard it all before, though. One of the first films I made as a young assistant producer was on a weekly television programme called On the Record. And I made a film about the fact that the BBC was doomed. That instead of someone, an editor figure, bundling stories together that we chose to sit down at the same time and watch at the same time as a nation, what we would do is shop around and there'd be infinite choice because the costs of entry, as economists called it, would get lower and lower and anybody could set up a programme. That was 1986. It's sort of just now happening. But the reason I argue the glass is still half empty is 40 years on, there are still millions of people listening to Today. Only about 6 months ago, the newspapers were saying we were finished.
Yeah, but that's because we've got really good presenters on the Today programme.
So I think, arguably, we've got some of the best of both worlds. There is still broadcasting, mass audiences, but the capacity like this, as this podcast demonstrates, for people to go in depth into subjects that interest them in a way that was impossible when, if I may, young man, say, when I was your age.
Can I just offer a view from someone who's spent a career in public relations? Because I'm actually more in the optimistic camp. Because why is it that public relations has become so big, so successful, and so important in business, political, and other lives? Because the risks of getting it wrong in dealing with journalists are so high now, if you are one of those companies, organisations or people, you're just not prepared to take the risk. I mean, I think it's interesting that one big article in a traditional newspaper now, as a result of social media, can cause untold damage to a brand with the speed at which it goes around the social media world. I can think of all sorts of examples. Ergo, the reason there are huge PR companies advising people in organisations that are trying to get their message across is because there's a lot of upside, but there's huge downside in getting it wrong.
David Yelland?
Yeah, well, look, the risk to news is that it's become a luxury good for rich people because, let me tell you this, the market for high-end financial and political news is thriving. It's thriving at Thomson Reuters, at Bloomberg, at the FT, at The Economist, all these high-end news sources for very wealthy people are doing brilliantly, and that market will always be catered for. But let me tell you, the mid-market, the mass market, if you like, the middle classes, if you like, in this country would have a very grim future, because there is no money anymore in the middle market. That's the problem. Daily Mail, Sun, Telegraph, even the Times, they are massively challenged.
Is Rupert Murdoch right? Newspapers are dead, and therefore his big moneymaker from the past. Will the Sun still be printed? Will it still exist?
I don't think it will. He's already written down the Sun to zero value on the balance sheet of the company. It's not worth a penny. The Sun currently is not worth a penny. I think, I was going to say if and when Rupert passes on, obviously, that comes from a long time working for Rupert. You can't even think that. Look, when that era passes, things will change very, very quickly. Certain papers will close. Certain people will be out of a job. It'll take days. It'll take days. Rupert Murdoch loves newspapers, and he supports and invests in journalism. And the rest of the family don't really. I don't think Lachlan really does. And the last thing I would say, and I often say this, is every working journalist in the English language around the world, including at the BBC actually, has benefited from Rupert Murdoch, because he lowered the costs and he invests in journalism. You may not like everything that he stands for, and I certainly have big question marks over it, even though I work for him. But fundamentally, he is an investor in the business of journalism. And for that, we have to applaud it.
What about a bit of positivity each? What do you think are the positives, Simon?
News in whatever form will continue to be an incredibly vital part of people's lives, but I think it'll be bespoke news. I think we're moving to a world where people will curate their own news legitimately, because the desire to sit in a subway reading a whole newspaper will simply not be there. So I think the future of bespoke news is that. I think also comment is so important. People love quality comment. And I think comment will continue to be a very important part of people's lives.
Look, David, why don't you go ahead, and I'm going to end on a cheery note.
For the future, basically, I would say if you listen to a lot of the BBC, they have something called trust, okay? That is absolutely essential. But consume all the rest of the media. I actually am very positive about the future. I think I might have a 25-year-old son who is very careful how he consumes media. I would not, that generation are far smarter than we give them credit for. But if you live in the UK, I think you are fortunate that you can switch on the radio or the TV in the morning. And of course, it's not perfect, but basically there's no one trying to lie to you there. There's no one trying to lie to you. And if someone lies to them or lies to you guys on the Today program, as I've already said, you will challenge those lies. So the public is well served. But the challenges there are huge challenges, which we will all of us, whatever role we play in the media, have to meet.
So if you run a news organisation, in the next minute, I'm going to save you millions of pounds on management consultancy fees. Here's some wisdom, hard earned. First of all, there's no editorial solution to the commercial problems of newspapers. You need to liberate yourself from that delusion, find commercial solutions to the commercial problems of newspapers. Second, don't depend on fickle advertisers. You can't trust Mark Zuckerberg to pay your salary forever. He's not interested in you. He doesn't really care about your audience. Third, you want as direct and as transactional a relationship with your audience as possible. Ask them to pay, and if your product is good enough, they will come. Fourth thing, as Simon says, uses the word bespoke, one future for journalism is specialism. Fishing Weekly, Investors Chronicle, The Cricketer. And the other thing is, if specialism's not your thing, you've got to go global. So if you're in the English language, there's 300 million people in America, there's a couple of 100 million people in India, you need to go global and use the brilliant technology of today to appeal to them. And as a culture, we need to make it cool and we need to make it pay to go out and find stuff out. Get sources, find stuff out, and ask difficult questions of people in power that they don't want you to ask. That's becoming less cool and less financially affordable. We need to reverse both those trends.